The Gospel of Matthew in the 16th chapter. Matthew chapter 16. We've been in this chapter for several weeks, and we'll finish it this morning, get to the Mount of Transfiguration next week. But Matthew chapter 16. Very familiar verses. Verse number 24. Then said Jesus unto his disciples, If any man will come after me, let him deny himself, and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. For what is a man profited, if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he shall reward every man according to his works. Verily I say unto you, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. There's probably no passage in the Gospel of Matthew that is more needed in the Western 21st century church today than these verses. The subject is discipleship, following Christ. Personal consecration, what a true Christian really is. And it runs opposite to probably 90% of what you will hear in pulpits of all kinds of churches across America. Because modern Christianity is self-centered. It is designed to make consumers happy, even if it means that you remain half-heathen. Because Christians want to claim to have a relationship with Christ while still preserving the relationship to the world. And when you stand the average Christian up against what Christ says about his true followers, you cannot help but notice something is seriously wrong. Most people came to church today to hear the preacher tell them something that'll make them feel good. Tell us how good we are and how proud God must be to have us on His side. Tell us that we're all winners and God just wants you to have the best life and wonderful things are in store for you, and I just feel like something good is about to happen. Tell us that we can worship God after worldly patterns and we need not worry about things like separation and holiness. Tell us, preacher, about the winning, but not the surrendering. The crown, but not the cross. The gain, but not the loss. That is why most people came to church today. I hope that's not why you came. Because if you did, you will be sorely disappointed. Now, I didn't choose the text. We're working our way through Matthew. It is the next text, and so there it is. And oftentimes I've come to church and I say, Lord, I want a positive, upbeat, encouraging, lifting, shouting type of message. And the Lord doesn't give me a lot of those. But oh, how we need this text. Because if this modern soft soap type of Christianity is, if that's what you want to pattern your Christianity after, then it is not the Christianity that Christ would have you to live. Because the essence of being a follower in Christ is denying yourself. It is losing yourself. It is bearing a cross. And by the way, if that is the essence of true Christianity, then we ought to look at every person who claims the name of Christ, and we ought to see evidences of that kind of life in your daily existence. If that is what it means to be a follower of Christ, then you have no right to claim to be a follower, a disciple of Christ, if that is not the mark and the measure of your life. It is the life that Christ took upon Himself when He came to this earth and when He walked upon this earth. And to follow Him is not just to go where He wants us to go. It's not just to surrender to a mission field, though we might think that that is the extreme. No, it is to live by the same principles that He lived. Now the words are not strange to us because This is not the first time that Jesus has made statements like this. In fact, this whole self-denial, take up your cross, follow me, that whole lose yourself, that really is woven into so many of his sermons. You find it over and over in all the Gospels. In Matthew 10 and verse 37, he says, he that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. He that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. He that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. Same thing. You come to Mark's Gospel, Mark 10 and verse 21. Jesus says, one thing thou lackest, go thy way, sell whatsoever thou hast, and give to the poor. Thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come, take up the cross and follow me. Different conversation, same thing. Luke chapter 14, there went great multitudes with him. He turned and said unto them, if any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, in his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whosoever does not bear his cross and come after me, he cannot be my disciple. John 12 and verse 24, verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. He that loveth his life shall lose it. He that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. And so it's it's a recurring theme in his preaching. The Lord is constantly coming back to this. And the reason why is because the Lord would not have you then or now to commit to following him without first counting the cost. That is why he discouraged the masses from following him. That is why he did not sugarcoat the sufferings that they could expect. He didn't downplay the demands because he knew the shallowness of their devotion, and he's not interested in shallow, superficial, selfish type of followers. And what modern evangelism has done is it's made the gospel, it's made church, it's made Christianity all about you. But I want to tell you that it's not all about you. If we stand in our pulpits and we tell people that Jesus just wants you to have a wonderful life and every day with Jesus is sweeter than it was the day before and it's just roses and cream, then we get a large crowd, but that's a lie is what that is. There are demands. There are crosses. There is shame. There is reproach. There is suffering. That's what it means to follow Christ. So we come to this text. And if ever we needed a text, it is this one. Look, if you would, in verse number 24, first of all, I want you to notice the meaning of consecration. Then said Jesus unto his disciples, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Now you have to put it in the context of Matthew 16, the entire chapter. What has he been talking about? You remember in this chapter, Peter and I think the other disciples as well, they've come to a very important revelation. Here's the revelation. He's the Messiah. You remember the confession, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. You are the Messiah. But what does that mean? When that Jew recognized you are the Messiah, when they think of Messiah, they think of glory. They think of kingdom. They think of a reign, a golden age, restoration, freedom from Roman bondage. Everything is wonderful when you think of the Messiah. But the part that they have missed in the Old Testament and even in the hints in his own teaching was that before he would be the reigning Messiah, he would also be the suffering Messiah. In fact, in just a few verses before this, you remember he had very explicitly foretold his own suffering. I'm going to suffer many things at the hands of the elders, going to die and going to be raised again. Do you remember how Peter responded to that? Not so, Lord. It took Peter off to himself, the Lord off to himself, and the Bible says that he rebuked the Lord. Oh Lord, this is not going to be this way. This cannot happen. We're not going to allow it. Would you please quit talking about all of this suffering and this death? We don't like that kind of talk. That's not in the plans. Just before that, the Lord had talked about building the church. You remember what he said? The gates of hell shall not prevail against it. That's the kind of stuff we want to hear. Then he talked about to Peter. He told to Peter, he said, Peter, I'll give you the keys of the kingdom. They don't even understand what all that means, but we like the way that sounds. Peter, whatsoever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatsoever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And again, they may not even understand all of that, but that's what we like. We like going to build the church, rise triumphant, gates of hell will not prevail, keys of the kingdom, authority. We like that kind of talk. So when the Lord talks about His suffering and His death, it doesn't fit in with their theology of the kingdom. And over He has dropped hints about it. And they've missed all of those hints. All along they've missed that He's going to die. Because that's not what they're expecting. We're expecting the keys of the kingdom. We're expecting the gates of hell to not prevail. We're expecting to be conquerors. We're expecting to be winners. That's what we signed up for. We're following You because we believe You're the Messiah. And for us, Messiah is glory. It's restoration. It's a golden age. It's wonderful. And Jesus says, yeah, but there's a death. There's a cross. When He points to His cross, that's not what they expect. But now the Lord turns to them and says, fellas, it's not just me that's going to take up a cross. It's you. It's not just me that's going to suffer. No, they're suffering for you. The servant is not greater than his master. If the world hated me, you need to know that the world is going to hate you. So following me, you must accept that I'm going to suffer, but you're going to suffer too. Whew. Radical thinking, isn't it? So break it down. He says in verse 24, if any man will come after me. Now there's some that take that statement as just an offer of the gospel. That He's talking to a lost person. That it's just the gospel in different words. And so what basically Christ is doing is He's inviting the lost person to come after Him and to be saved. And then the rest of the statement would be the results of getting saved. It's the changed life that comes when you place your faith in the Lord. I don't believe that's what He's saying. That there is an invitation to come to Christ. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden. But this is not an invitation to come to Christ. This is a call to come after Christ. If any will come after me, I believe it's not the call to salvation. It is the call to discipleship, to following, to learning, to obeying. There are many who have come to Christ, but they have never gone on with Christ. If you would follow after me, there's 3 steps to that. If any man will come after me, here's the first one. Let him deny himself. I doubt there's a whole lot of that going on. Right? We indulge ourselves, but there's not a lot of denying ourselves. I look for a deep theological definition of denial. Here it is. It's to say no to yourself. That's what it is. It is to tell yourself no. Later on, Peter will deny the Lord. And the way he denies the Lord is he says, I know not the man. He says no to the Lord. Now there's a common misunderstanding that to follow the Lord you have to deny yourself things. Things. I'm studying church history in preparation for Bible Institute this semester. And I've been listening to some lectures on the monastic orders of the Catholic Church. The Augustinian, the Benedict order, the monasteries. And they were built on the philosophy of self-denial. So we'll take a vow of charity or a vow of poverty or whatever it might be, a vow of suffering. And we're going to deny ourselves things. That's not what it says. It is not to deny yourself things, but let him deny himself. Himself. It is saying no to self-will, to self-interest, to self-glory, to self-consciousness, to self-preservation. I think the best Old Testament example would probably be Moses. The Bible says in Hebrews that he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. That is a denial of self. He said no to some things that his self wanted to enjoy. He said no to himself. In modern Christianity, it is about self-indulgence. But to be a true follower of Christ, it is to deny yourself. Self-denial. One writer said, what does it mean to live a life of self-denial, dying to self? What does it really mean? He said, when you're neglected, unforgiven, when you are purposefully set at naught and you sting and you hurt with the insult of that oversight, but your heart is happy being counted worthy to suffer for Christ, that is dying to self. When your good is evil spoken of, when your wishes are crossed, and your advice is disregarded, and your opinions are ridiculed, and you refuse to let anger rise in your heart or even defend yourself, you take it all patiently in loving silence, that is dying to self. When you lovingly and patiently bear any disgrace, when you can stand face to face with folly and extravagance and spiritual insensitivity and endure it as Jesus did, that is dying to self. When you are content with any food, any money, any clothing, any climate, any society, any solitude, any interruption by the will of God, that is dying to yourself. When you never care to refer to yourself in conversation or record your own good works or itch after commendation from others, when you truly love to be unknown, that is dying to self. When you can receive correction and reproof from someone of less stature than yourself and humbly admit inwardly as well as outwardly that he's right and find no resentment and no rebellion in your heart, that is dying to self. Are you dead yet? And I say this morning that if in your heart you have a heart full of anger or pride or envy or bitterness or self-ambition or worldly ambitions or carnal affections, then you have never died to self. You cannot live for you and for Christ. You must choose one or you must choose the other. I said in Sunday school this morning that I'm not much of a counselor. I think that all problems are about the same. Every marital problem that you have, somebody's not dying to self. Every church problem that you face, somebody's not dying to self. Every rebellious teenager in a Christian home, somebody is not dying to self. So he says, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself. There's a second thing. Let him deny himself and take up his cross. Now when he says his cross, I don't think Jesus is talking about his cross. You don't take his cross, you take your cross. But what is your cross? And it's usually preached that your cross is the trials of life. You have some physical infirmity. You have a mother-in-law. Some adversity in your life that you cannot get away from, you didn't choose. That is your cross. You know for the past year that I've had some issues with my back and sciatica nerve run down the left leg and sometimes better than other times, sometimes worse. Had surgery, enjoyed it so much, have another surgery. Do a shot before it, do a shot after it, try a nerve root block. Let's implant a device, let's do this, let's do that. I get the idea. I understand now why they practice medicine. I get it. And so the pain was pretty bad, and so, I don't know, a month or two ago, I finally went to Pain Institute over in Pensacola, and I've got a pain management doctor, and he looked at all the MRIs and everything, and they can't really determine where the pain is coming from, can't pinpoint it. We'd done a nerve root block at L5. He said, we need to do it at L4. We're going to move it up. I think it's coming from there. That's a guess, but his guess is as good as mine. These shots are only $700 or $800 a piece, so, let's try one. So we set the appointment in Thursday morning. Thursday morning I was so excited. Finally went to get the shot that's going to take away the pain and you get your life back. And so I had the shot. As far as I can tell, it did absolutely nothing. Nothing. So you learn to deal with it. It is what it is. And somebody says, well, that's your cross. That's what you've got to bear. You cheerfully bear it and you enjoy it. And whatever bad lot in life, that becomes your cross. I don't think that's what he's talking about at all. I don't think so. I believe that the cross he refers to is the reproach of Christ. Hebrews 13 and verse 13, let us therefore go forth unto him without the camp, bearing his reproach. The cross was a shameful spectacle. It was the reproach of being a condemned criminal and dying a barbaric death and hanging there in shame and disgrace. And I believe the Lord is saying that if you would be a follower of mine, you must be willing to take that same reproach upon yourself. It's not just bad luck. No. It's being reviled by the same world that reviled him. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 4, for I think that God has set us forth as the apostles last, as it were, appointed to death. For we are made a spectacle unto the world. We are fools for Christ's sake. We are made as the filth of the world. We are the offscouring of all things unto this day. The Lord is saying is that if you would be a disciple of mine, you must boldly stand before this world and you must claim me as your own before a hostile world. It's the real reason why I have a problem with Christian celebrities. They just don't seem to go together. I saw a sign in Pace, Assembly of God, is having Tim Tebow. I don't know if Tim Tebow is a Christian. I have no idea. But for $50 you can go and you can hear Tim Tebow. I just have a problem with that whole concept. How does Christian celebrity square with if the world hated you, it would hate me? Huh? How does that happen? And if you're ashamed of Jesus Christ and you cower before this world, then you are not a true follower of Jesus Christ. You may be saved, you may be going to heaven, but you cannot claim to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And when you kids downplay the fact at school that you're a Christian because you want to be cool and you want to fit in, then you are denying Christ and you are demonstrating the fact that you are not a disciple of His. Mark 8 and verse 38, whosoever therefore shall be ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed when he cometh in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Don't be ashamed of Jesus. One of the things that bothers me is that we don't see many people walk the aisle and trust Christ. I wish we saw more people. I really do. So in our zeal and our burden for that, here's what we often do at our invitations. We try to make it as easy as possible. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody bow your heads. Everybody close your eyes. Nobody looking. Slip your hand up, put it back down. Step you through it. And I think that subconsciously we're trying to remove all of the obstacles, all of the barriers, make it, and I'm for making it as easy as possible to trust Christ. But if somehow I can get a sinner to sneak down without anybody seeing you, and let a counselor deal with you and say a prayer and get back to your seat and step, you understand the concept of what I'm trying to talking about? But hey, wait a minute. He went to a cross for you. He hung there in shame and disgrace. And he was mocked, and he was ridiculed, and he was blasphemed, and he was beaten, and he was abused, and he was crucified. And if you're too ashamed to publicly confess Christ, then one day he'll be ashamed of you as well. He says, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. I think we sing songs sometime and we don't even realize what we're singing. Wherever he leads, I'll go. Are you sure? Whatever it takes for my will to break, that's what I'd be willing to do. But that is exactly what a consecrated life looks like. It is a submissiveness to the will of Christ. There is the meaning of consecration. In verse number 25, there is the measure of consecration. Look at verse 25. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it. And whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. Now, the only way that makes any sense is if you realize he's talking about two different lives. If you want to preserve your natural life, then you won't have any spiritual life. You will only experience spiritual life, not salvation, but spiritual life by your willingness to lose your love for the world. I had a man a few weeks ago tell me something very honest, very honest. Very rare that you'd have a man that would just look at you and just say, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm just going to tell you what's in my heart. And I had a man tell me the other day, he said, I'm just going to be honest with you. He said, I'm not bragging on this. He said, but there is a large part of me that really loves the things of the world. I want to hold on to it. I want to be a part of it. I want to obtain more of it. Fleshly things appeal to me. I'm enamored by the glamour and the glitter and the sparkle and the appeal. It's being honest. But there's no walk with God. There's no consecrated life. There's no deeply spiritual experience. I find that in my heart, I really love it. But would you forsake it to walk with God? Would you forsake it to be more spiritual? And it doesn't mean that you resign yourself to poverty and misery and self-abasement and pitiful existence and the whole idea that if I'm going to be a Christian then I'm just going to be miserable. No, you can turn this into a very morbid thing where you resign yourself to just being miserable all of your life, and that becomes the means of being spiritual. But that's not what he's talking about at all. I lose my life for his life. It's not the more miserable I am, the more spiritual I am. It's not at all. But the Lord is directing the heart attitude. What is your heart toward this world? When you can look at this world and your ambitions and your dreams and your plans and say, I would gladly lay it down to follow Christ. When you can honestly say, take the world, but give me Jesus. He says in verse 26, for what is a man profited if he should gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Most people place an emphasis on the body. The Bible places an emphasis on the soul. Your body is what you see. Your soul is what you feel. It's your mind, will, emotions. It's your conscience. It's your imagination. It's your personality. It's the whole being. The other night I was driving, I was tired, I needed some energy, sugar high. And so I stopped at a convenience store and I got a Coke and I got a Snickers bar. I don't like Coke and I don't like Snickers, but I needed sugar. I needed a high. Now you know what you do when you get a candy bar? You unwrap the candy bar and you eat the candy bar and you throw the wrapper away, right? Be a silly thing to take the candy bar and to unwrap it and throw the candy bar away and keep it. No, the wrapper is worthless. It's just a container of the good stuff. But a lot of people take the mistake of neglecting the soul and just taking care of the body. So Jesus is talking about the soul. And really, in verse 26, he makes a statement in the form of a question. When you come out of the bedroom and your wife asks, are you going to wear that out? That's not a question. That's a statement, right? And so the question is, what shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? The statement is nothing. You would gain nothing if you won the whole world and you lost your soul. If you could gain the world at the expense of losing your soul, you would lose at the game of life. It would do you absolutely no good. Because for one thing, nobody has ever gained the whole world. Think about the wealthiest man. I don't know who it is. But whoever the wealthiest man is in the world, I'm going to tell you something about him. He doesn't have enough. He's still trying to get some more. Right? And what is amazing is not that men will sell Christ for the whole world, it's that they'll sell Christ so cheaply. It's not that they'll trade their soul for the whole world. It's that they'll do it for so much less. Judas betrayed the Lord for 30 pieces of silver. What a cheap price for the soul of man and for the destiny of man. And some of you this morning, you're selling your relationship with Christ and your fellowship and spiritual life and your testimony for such a cheap price. Nobody's ever gained the whole world. And two, whatever part of the world you do gain, you can't keep it. Like I said, I've been reading a lot of church history and studying a lot of church history. In the 8th or 9th century, there was a guy in France. His name was Charlemagne. You ever heard of Charlemagne the Great? Charlemagne the Great. And some years ago, they discovered the tomb of Charlemagne the Great. And when they buried Charlemagne, they buried him sitting on a throne, not in a coffin. They buried him sitting on a throne. And they buried him with his crown on his head. But by the time he rotted and decayed, the crown had slipped down over his head and was hanging around his neck. And when they buried Charlemagne sitting on a throne with a crown around his head, they put a Bible in his lap and they had a finger pointing at a verse. You know what verse old Charlemagne was pointing to? What is a man profited if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? They buried him on a throne with a crown, and that's as far as he got to take it. And you spend your life chasing the world, and one day you will leave it all behind. If you want to know how rich you are, then add up everything that death can't take away. And that's how rich you are. So you can't gain the whole world. What you do gain, you can't keep it. And what you do gain, you can't keep, and it won't satisfy you. Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 10, he that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity. I've known people that didn't have a dime in the pocket and they had the joy of the Lord. And I've known people that had all kinds of money and they were miserable. Because money can buy you a marriage, but it can't buy you love. It can hire you a doctor, but it can't buy you health. It can pamper your body, but it can't save your soul. Suppose God was to come to you and make you an offer. I'll give you everything that you want in this world. Every possession of power, influence, pleasure. I'll give you everything that you can ever dream of for one finger. You give me one finger, and I'll give you all the world. Now, to be honest with you, most of us would probably take that deal. One finger, and I get to choose the finger. I'll take that. Or we suppose that God comes to you and says, same offer, everything. You name it, I'll give every bit of it to you for one hand. You know, there are some people that would take that. I'd take that deal, maybe. Or suppose I'll give you the wealth of the world. I'll make you a billionaire. Both hands. A hand and an eye. Your hearing. Eventually, at some point, you're going to say, you know what? I don't care how much you give me. That's not worth it. The price is too high. There would come a point where you would say that even the wealth of the world, it is not worth that. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get you to see that when you exchange the world for your soul, you are giving far more and you're getting far less. Your soul is worth more than your hands, and it's worth more than your hearing, and it's worth more than your body, and you're selling it for so little of the wealth of the world. What a tragic loss. Personal consecration is when you measure a life lived for God and a life lived for self, and you determine it is more valuable to live for God than to live for this world. There is the meaning of consecration. There is the measure of consecration. I want you to notice in verse 27, there is the motivation for consecration. For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he shall reward every man according to his works. Do you know why you ought to sell out to Christ and leave the world behind? Do you know why you ought to live your life for God and become a Christian and follow Christ instead of the things of the world? Do you know why you ought to say no to yourself, deny yourself, take up a cross, bear His... Do you know why? Because there's a second coming. And He's coming one day in His glory with rewards for believers who will follow that path. You can have rewards now, or you can wait for God to reward you. He's coming in His glory and He's bringing His rewards with Him. Would you agree with me? Would you agree with me that if you're living for this world and you're trying to win this world, then the prospect of Him coming and rewarding you is not very exciting? However, if you've given your life to the Lord and you're dead to self and you're dead to the things of the world, then the fact that Jesus is coming again, that is an exciting prospect. And a man who selfishly hugs life to himself and his great overwhelming concern is ease and comfort and luxury and pleasure and security and riches and prosperity and self-indulgence, that man has no desire to see Jesus ever come again. But the man who gives his life for Christ, the man who abandons himself, the man who may become a beggar, who may even become a martyr, he becomes a prince with God forever. He says in verse 28, "Verily I say unto you, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in His kingdom." The very next passage, chapter 17, is the Mount of Transfiguration. And we're going to look at that next week. And I think that what Jesus is saying here in verse 28 is you're getting ready to see a little preview of what it'll be like when I come back in glory. And some of you standing here, you're going to see this. Peter was one of them. And Peter would later write, "I was an eyewitness of His majesty." He's coming again in His glory, and He's bringing His rewards with Him. And you follow Him, and you take up your cross, and you deny yourself, and you don't live for the world, you live for Him, and He rewards you when He comes back. That's the motivation of it. Every Christian in this room ought to desire that. To be a true disciple. To be a true follower of Jesus Christ. This is what it means to follow after Him. It is far different than modern religious and what it proposes. I say that if you're truly saved, this should be the supreme desire and the delight of your life. And no matter where you are, there ought to be a hunger to know Him more, to love Him more, to follow Him more. Would you bow your heads with me this morning? If you've never committed your life to Him, why don't you come this morning and do that very thing? Whether it is to answer a call that has been pressing in your life, or it is to renounce a love for the things of this world, or it is to commit yourself to a more faithful walk with Him, however that translates in your life, but to be a true disciple of Jesus Christ. So Lord, help us this morning. Help us to learn the paradox that the way down is up, and that to be low is to be high. That you heal the broken heart, that the crushed spirit of Psalm 51 is the rejoicing spirit. That the repenting soul is the victorious soul, that to have nothing is to really possess everything. That to bear the cross is really to be crowned. That to give is to receive. I pray to whatever degree, to whatever measure, that we're not following after you, that we're not denying self-ambition and self-interest, that we're not taking up our cross, that we are ashamed of you. I pray the Holy Spirit would convict us of that. Bring us into a measure of deeper Christianity. May we be done May we be done with selfish religion. To realize that this is not about us, it is about you. It's not morbid, it's not miserable, it's not misery, it's joy is what it is. Or just commit yourself